Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. In this part, we are going to discuss the role of Shariah board. So basically, the Shariah board varies from one board to another, and it depends upon the nature, the extent, and degree of the Shariah compliance. And in addition to that, the Shariah board is actually different based on jurisdiction in which the IFI operates. Yeah? And based on the foundational dimension of the Sharia governance framework, so the Sharia board has a fiduciary duties towards all the stakeholders of the Islamic financial institutions. Yeah. So stakeholders here differs include the stakeholders, yeah, the investors, the customers, the staff, and also the public. And it is also contended that the duty to protect the rights and interests of the account holders, especially the investment account holders, comes under the purview of the Sharia board, since they do not have any right of participation in the Islamic financial institutions. Yeah. So in this case, the Sharia board is actually representing uh, the IAH in order to ensure that the rights and the interests of account holders are protected. And in addition to that, the integrity of the IFIs also greatly depends on the status of their Sharia compliance, yeah? The impact of the products, the professional competency, and also the behavior of the Islamic financial institution towards the observance of Sharia laws. So in this case, the Sharia board plays an important fundamental role by ensuring and enhancing the credibility of Islamic financial institutions. In addition to that, the Sharia board having the authority to issue fatwa via the collective ijtihad. Depends on jurisdiction. Sometimes the numbers of Sharia members in the Sharia board consists of 3 people, 3%, or 5%, or 7%. It depends on jurisdictions. Some jurisdictions have a specific regulation on the numbers, the minimum numbers of the Sharia board, Sharia members to sit in a Sharia board. And as a general observation, the Sharia board plays a role as a control mechanism to monitor the Islamic financial institutions' business transaction so that it is in accordance to the Sharia compliance. This includes approving the documentation, the SOPs, the policies, all the terms and conditions, yeah, of specific products and services of the offered by the Islamic financial institutions. In addition to that, any income which derive from a non-halal business or a non-Sharia compliance business, so Sharia board have to decide how to dispense the income to the charitable organization. And last but not least, is related to the ensuring that zakat funds are properly calculated and properly distributed, especially in the case where the zakat authority allows the Islamic financial institutions to distribute parts of the zakat funds that should be paid by the Islamic financial institutions. Yeah? So that are some of the rules of Sharia board, and in different jurisdiction, it might be there might be some other rules of the Sharia boards towards the Islamic financial institutions. Next, we look into the standard setting agencies. Yeah, in the case of an international level, so we have the IOFI Sharia governance standards. If you can see here, the IOF have issued 5 governance standards related to Shariah, such as the Shariah Supervisory Board, the appointment, composition and report, and also the Shariah Review, governance standard on Shariah Review. They also have the governance standard on internal Shariah Review, governance standard on audit and governance committee, and also independence of the Shariah board. Yeah, and this is on the global or international level. And in the case of Malaysia, the standard setting body is actually the Shariah Advisory Council of the Bank Negara Malaysia for banking institution and for securities capital market. We have to refer to the Shariah Advisory Council of the Securities Commission. So the Shariah Advisory Council of Bank Negara Malaysia have issued numbers of documents, such as the most important thing is the Shariah governance policy documents. So in these documents, it governs how the Shariah, the observance of Shariah governance within the Islamic financial institution, starting from the appointment of the board of directors, appointment of the Shariah board, the process of appointment, what are the roles and responsibility of the Shariah board, and also what are the roles and responsibility of the board of directors, the responsibility of the management of the banks, in order to ensure that the governance framework within the bank is properly observed. And in addition to that, the SAC of Bank Negara Malaysia also issued different, you can say, guidance on the different Shariah contracts, such as Istisna, Arahan, Bain Sarf, Wa'ad, Wakalah, Wadi'ah, Tawarruk, Qal, Musyarakah, Murabaha, Mudarabah, Kafalah, Ijara, and Hibah. The standards is actually based on each contracts, so we can refer to each standard which has been, or parameters, Shariah parameters which has been issued by the SAC of Bank Negara Malaysia. This can be downloaded from the website of the SAC of the Bank Negara Malaysia. So for the Islamic financial institution, they can refer when they decided on issues, they can use the Shariah standards which has been issued by the Shariah Advisory Council of the Bank Negara Malaysia as a point of reference. Yeah. And then we move on to the Shariah governance process. So if we can see here, we have 8 process in order to observe the Shariah governance. So the governance process represents the instrumental functions of the Shariah board as part of the institution of corporate governance of Islamic financial institutions. So here we briefly explain the processes related to the Shariah governance, which includes the appointment of the Shariah board, the composition of the Shariah board, its qualification, the compliance process, the Shariah coordination, and also the Shariah compliance review and Shariah compliance report. Firstly, related to the appointment, the members of the Shariah board are appointed by the board of directors of the Islamic banks, the Islamic financial institutions. So these are the practices practice in Malaysia. So normally the appointment the Islamic financial institutions through its board of directors will nominate the name of Shariah members that will sit in their Shariah board to the Bank Negara Malaysia, and then the Bank Negara Malaysia will approve whether the the nominated name is can be appointed to sit in the Shariah board or not. And so there are several forms that need to be filled out by the Islamic banks throughout the process. And it's normally the process of nomination should take three months before the expected date of appointment of the said Shariah members. And the composition of Shariah board should be from the Shariah scholars who are experts in the area of fiqh, muamalat, and usulul fiqh. And it differs and varies from one Islamic financial institutions to another. And normally the Shariah board who sits at the international levels normally comprise of a leading international and regional scholars, while the Shariah boards at the domestic IFI consists of local scholars. Most IFI appoint between 3 to 6 members for the Shariah boards. So again, it depends on jurisdiction and the IFI itself. And it differs on jurisdiction. For example, in the case of IOFI Shariah board, it comprises of not more than 20 members who are appointed by the board of trustees for a 4-year term from Shariah scholars, among Shariah scholars. And the IOFI governance standard requires at least 3 members at the IFI level. And this is followed by a few countries such as Bahrain, Dubai, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, and also the Malaysia. And for instance, the Bank Negara Malaysia put up the minimum requirement numbers of members of the Shariah boards. And the Shariah, in the case in Indonesia, the Shariah governance in Indonesia puts a requirement of a minimum of 2 persons and a maximum of not more than half the numbers of the board of directors of the respective IFIs. The Shariah boards of the State of Bank of Pakistan comprises of 2 Shariah scholars and 3 experts in the area of banking, accounting, and legal frameworks. So in the case of Malaysia, in relation to that, in the case of Malaysia, nowadays the Bank Negara Malaysia allowed practitioners or people who are not from the background of Shariah to be appointed to sit in a Shariah board, to be the members of the Shariah board. However, in some cases, they might not be allowed to vote in providing decisions. So, by giving access or appointing people who are not from Shariah background but have expertise in other areas such as legal, accounting, or economics, so it makes the practitioners, it makes the discussion within the Shariah board and Shariah members more lively and more towards the practical aspects of the banking and finance. Next, we move on to the qualification of the Shariah board. It is contended that the ideal qualification of the board of members are those who are from experts in Shariah and law, especially in the area of fiqh, muamalat, and usul fiqh. So the reason is basically the Shariah board mostly deals with issues relating to the commercial law in character. So these are in line with the governance Shariah governance framework issued by the Bank Negara Malaysia, and different in the case of IOFI governance standard and the IFSB 10. They allow the appointment of a person who has no expertise in fiqh muamalat to be a Shariah board member, to strengthen the ability of the Shariah board to scrutinize and understand banking business and its operation. So this is what I mentioned earlier. In the case of Malaysia as well, the Bank Negara Malaysia allowed the appointment of a person who has no expertise in fiqh muamalat to sit in a Shariah board. However, this is to allow or to strengthen the ability of discussion and the ability of Shariah board to scrutinize and to understand the basic banking businesses and operations. And next we move on to the Sharia compliance process. So every Islamic financial institution has its own procedure for the Sharia board's practices. And currently there is no specific standard guidelines for the Sharia board on the aspect of management, product approval, ex-ante and post-ante auditing. Yeah. So the practice is that there will be a Sharia secretariat or department to coordinate and handle Sharia matters. Yeah. And the officer in the Sharia department mostly handles clerical and office works pertaining to Sharia board matters, such as the compiling and handling documents which need to be presented during the Sharia board meetings. And nowadays, I think research functions is also being played by the Sharia department, whereby they conducted pre-meeting research in order to assist the Sharia board during the meeting. And during a Sharia board meeting, members discuss various Sharia issues, including concept and structure of a new and existing products, the documentation, legal documentation, the operation, the SOPs, the policies, and also the terms and conditions of products within the meetings. And the Sharia board should be given all this material of meetings earlier, prior to that meeting, so that they have sufficient time to read and study the documents before the meeting is taken place. Yeah. Next, we move on to the Sharia coordination. So Sharia coordination is vital to the Sharia governance system. So the Sharia coordinator acts as a secretary or liaison officer that coordinates the Sharia governance process, including interaction with the Sharia board, the internal or external review unit, and other organs of governance. Yeah. So these roles normally played by the Sharia departments within that the banks. Then we have the Sharia compliance review. So unlike conventional banks, the Islamic financial institutions are required to undertake a Sharia review and internal Sharia review process for the purpose of ensuring that all transactions are in conformity with the Sharia principles. So in the Sharia review, normally an internal Sharia review will conduct an exercise whereby they examine the extent of Sharia compliance by the banks, and then they will provide a report on that review to the Sharia boards. For example, the internal Sharia review or Sharia compliance review decided to conduct a review on one product, for example, the tawarruk personal financing. So they will go to the business units which manage that products, sometimes in branches as well, and they will see how the especially the documentation of the products, how it is being conducted or executed by the bank staff, and to ensure whether it is in compliance with the decision which has been made by the Sharia boards in the pre-product approval process. So after the review exercise being conducted, so the internal Sharia review personnel shall report it to the Sharia board in order to get direction, especially in the case of or event of Sharia non-compliance. And then last but not least, they will prepare a Sharia report. So the Sharia report is actually prepared by the Sharia board informing that the activities, information, and any Sharia pronouncement and declaration of Sharia compliance, especially in the case of a report within the report to the board, and also report in the annual report of the banks. Yeah. So in the annual report of the bank, if you can browse through some of the annual reports, you can see Shariah board statement or report, which generally contains information on the duties and services rendered to the respective IFI, such as the fatwa issuance and the activities being conducted by the Shariah boards, and also disclosure whether there is any non-Sharia compliance income, and if there is any non-Sharia compliance income, so where did the banks channel the amount of the non-Sharia compliance income? Yeah, and in some jurisdictions, they have published the numbers of meeting, numbers of products approved, and the remuneration of the Sharia boards. Yeah. And also in the case of Sharia non-compliance, so what are the rectification process which has been taken by the Sharia board? And normally this report will be signed by all the Sharia board members. Yeah? And in some cases, maybe a representative which has been appointed among the Sharia boards. Yeah? So that's all about the Sharia governance process. So inshallah we'll continue the next video on the some of the Sharia governance issues. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.